We've got Lachlan Markay, writer at the Washington Free Beacon, and one of our very favorites. It's Richard Fowler, host of the Richard Fowler Show. Gentlemen, welcome back to The Independence.
Hello, hello.
And I have to ask you, Lachlan, I'll start with you since we haven't seen you in a while. Are we screwed?
Well, if we put our fate in the hands of the TSA, as was proposed today, we're certainly a step closer to doomsday.
Let's talk about some of those proposals.
Sure. Yeah, the idea of instituting some sort of screening mechanism at airports, especially for passengers coming from countries where Ebola is a big problem. It's probably better than closing off borders entirely and, preventing people from coming or going. But again, airport security-wise, we don't have a great track record. I don't think Americans have too much faith in our airport screeners. They're probably not going to be confident it's going to get much done.
The first step, though, is to push things away out from the TSA. Every time you come to the United States from Europe, you have to answer a bunch of questions about hoof and mouth disease, which I think was eradicated in the century or something like that.
Yeah, tell that to the preschoolers who have to stay home for 2 weeks with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, you make the other airlines start. So it's better that they do that than that they don't do that, right? Before anyone comes here, that they're being screened and looked at and maybe a little thermometer and a swab before they get on a plane.
There are no flights from Monrovia to the United States. So you have to fly through some other big city in order to get here with millions of other people. It's going to be impossible to shut down travel from West Africa to just about anywhere, especially to the United States. So the TSA is going to screw them up. Like, I don't trust that they're x-raying my shoes properly. How are they going to handle Ebola? And if not the TSA, then who should?
Listen, I got to tell you, I don't think we should close our borders at all, Kennedy. I think that's the dumbest idea I've heard yet, because it doesn't do us any good. Because Ebola could happen in China and it can come from here, or Japan, or Australia. It can be anywhere, right? I mean, there was a case today in France, I want to say. I mean, the simple fact is the best in Spain. There we go.
It was a nurse's aide in Spain, yes.
Exactly. And the simple fact is that the only way we can solve this problem is making sure we have the best resources on the ground to deal with it when it shows up. And what we saw in Texas was a mess, right? Like, they didn't know what to do. They didn't clean the house. They didn't do they didn't quarantine the people.
But that's going to happen with the first one, maybe 2 cases here. And then I think everyone starts to lock it up because no one wants to set off hysteria. And the triage nurse, she was kind of a dum-dum. She's like, have you been anywhere sweaty where you might have a hemorrhagic fever lately?
I mean, apparently it was documented. And I think what's important here is what we don't need is hysteria.
Yes.
Right. And all of this stuff that's spinning up, the new screening mechanisms at the airports, none of that would have actually prevented this thing in Texas from happening. Because this is a 20-odd day incubation period.
He wasn't sick when he got on the plane.
Are we going to hold everyone at the airport? We don't really know. What's actually going to defeat this isn't the CDC. It's not the TSA. It's the fact that we have a first world healthcare system here. And we know how to deal with stuff like this. And most of the hysterics over this are a bit overblown. That's
a tricky prophylactic that you're employing there. I mean, have you ever flown with a fever? I have.
Yeah, it sucks. Yeah.
I didn't have Ebola, but I imagine that if I were in the state that I was in when I've flown when I was sickly, I would have been pulled aside.
Well, yeah, the potential false positives make it even worse. And, in D.C. on Thursday or Friday, there was, potential Ebola symptoms with a patient at Howard University Hospital, and people freaked out. Yeah. The whole city was going nuts, and then it turned out to have been a false positive.
Most of the scares have been negative, but, if you're sweaty, if you have diarrhea, nausea, and a fever, that could also be the flu. And we're coming upon flu season.
Absolutely.
And we need to remember that this needs to be stopped actually in Liberia. That, first of all, there's NPR did a great story about Bridgestone, Firestone, one of the two, they're the same, I forget. But they have a huge factory there, and they went into full lockdown mode. They just made this a priority for everybody. They managed.
Was that in Nigeria? Because they did lock it up.
In Nigeria, they locked down.
Yeah, they did.
I got to tell you, Kenny, I think we would be remiss if we do not give a big shout out to all the healthcare workers and nurses and doctors that are working overnight to make sure that we're safe. Because that's really the only way we can prevent this. When it happens, you have to have the right nurse getting the right history, the right doctor getting the right history, and quarantining that patient. And then public health service, like public health folks, social workers going out and finding out who else came in contact with this person. So they're doing an epic job, and they get big shout-outs from me.
By the way, the people in Western Africa, the health workers who are still working there in some of those ramshackle clinics, they are doing God's work. I mean, that is an incredible thing to maintain those posts. And they are at the, are they in the hot zone? Not only the front lines, but
like
that is almost certain death. So bless them all. You remember Leon Panetta? He was a congressman, Clinton's chief of staff, and then CIA director and defense secretary under Obama. Oh, yeah, he's written a book. And since he wants to sell copies, he appears to be leveling some harsh truths at the smart man he once loved.
I think he was tough on terrorism. He made the very tough decision on bin Laden. But these last years, I think he kind of lost his way. It's been a mixed message.
Oh, yeah, mixed indeed. He also said this about ISIS.
I think we're looking at kind of a 30-year war kind of history here, in which it's going to take a long time to be able to go after these elements.
Wow, a 30-year war perpetrated by a reclusive whiner. Where do I sign up? That sounds like so much fun. This is going to be a surefire success. And of course, they're saying that he should have waited until the president was out of office. But it works that way.
It always works that way. And it also always works that the president lost his way just as soon as I left the White House.
That's what I was going to say.
Exactly.
Kind of overlap here.
I remember seeing him in those pictures when they got bin Laden.
Do you remember when John McCain got an earful of dookie from people over saying that we need to be in Iraq for 50 years, maybe 60, maybe 100 years? Yeah. Well, the 30-year war, this war started, let's say, in 1993. The first World Trade Center bombing. Can we say this sort of fight against Islamic terrorism? So 30 years out from here, plus that 20, we're already at 50. Here,
I would argue we're 55 years. But
what's that?
I would argue 55 years, Reagan and the bombing of the plane, and we could start there and work our way.
Whatever it is, we are in.
You can go back pretty far.
We are in a twilight struggle that nobody actually wants to fight and has no enthusiasm for. And I think he's speaking a kind of truth there. And the truth is, I think that the only way Americans really want to deal with it is by not dealing with it, by dealing with the way that we're dealing with Yemen, which is like, I don't know what's going on in Yemen, so maybe some drones will take care of it.
Blah, blah, blah. But he sort of links Yemen and Somalia and Libya all together.
It is all together.
But he also, his hindsight, I don't think it's 20/20 because he wanted to arm the Syrian rebels. He wanted to bomb Syria, and he also wanted to keep a big surging troop force in Iraq. I think the guy was off base on almost all that, right?
I mean, it might just be CYA situation at this point, but I think it's damning to hear him talk about sort of the political approach that the administration took to this entire conflict leading up to the 2012 election. A lot of the criticism is politically
motivated, too. I don't know that it's particularly substantive. When you talk about leaving 10 to 20,000 American troops in Baghdad, I'm not certain that prevents the rise of ISIS in Syria. In fact, I'm quite skeptical of that conclusion.
I think he's probably more qualified to say one way or the other than either of us.
Even you, do you think that's reasonable to suggest that ISIS coming into existence in a place like Syria, building up its force strength, would actually not happen because of 10 or 20,000 people, or that the corruption of the Iraqi regime
is correct, if he's not lying when he says that America's military commanders were saying that at the time, and the White House, as he says, ignored them because it felt that
says the same thing.
But wait a second.
But I think even if that's being said, does that sound credible to you?
Yeah, it absolutely sounds credible.
Well, I completely disagree. I don't think it's credible at all. I think you have to go back to history here, and I hate to be the history buff on the panel tonight, but
okay, got a candy cane tie, take it.
But I think you look at the facts, right? You look about how Iraq was created. It was like basically some English folks in a room drawing with crayons, like, oh, we're just going to draw.
1918,
No, it's not unique to Iraq, and so you create a situation, and then you continue to have this powder keg where it's like a pressure cooker where everybody's like, oh, we're going to go in here and have a little bit of fun, right? But there's three sort of factions that are going against each other. When we went in 2000, right, we sort of backed one and not the other two, and now you create a situation where now these people are radicalized. And it wouldn't matter if we had 100,000 troops there. It would not stop ISIS from radicalizing because they were those folks were left out of the process and they were upset about it.
Well, it's not ISIS, who else? And I don't feel bad they were left out of the process.
Yeah, I mean, the political situation on the ground, Maliki was clearly not a good actor and not sort of serving our interests.
Right.
But that doesn't mean
but putting American men and women in harm's way because Maliki does not doing his job is wrong.
But you have medium to longer term objectives of establishing a stable political state.
I'm sorry, you cannot put
American political lives of the rise of the Islamic State right now.
Okay, by the way, Lachlan, that's false disconnect because you can actually check all of the above. And all those things are bad. I mean, the vacuum, too many forces, the nation building, all that stuff, leaving them there for 6 decades, none of it makes sense, and it all creates the situation that we're in. And Panetta is partially to blame. And I think it is a case of COI. He's trying to cover a lot more than his years. And he's got a long way to go. And so will everyone else in this administration and the previous administration. That's why the show is The Independence, gentlemen. We will see you a little bit later to